welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ronan Lyons, Assistant Professor at Trinity College Dublin and author of the latest Daft Rental report. Ronan, today's a busy day for you, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Carol.
Ronan, the latest Daft Rental report, you might just talk us through some of the headline figures. I mean, look, the one that jumped out to me was certainly about stock levels, but you might just take us through some of the key findings.
Absolutely, yeah. So the report looks at the last 12 months. So it looks mostly at the COVID era of the rental market, and is really, it covers the whole country. And there's kind of two separate stories. There's the Dublin story and there's the story in the rest of the country. In Dublin, rents have fallen by a little bit more than 3% over the last year. Whereas in the rest of the country, they're actually up by about 5.5%. And that 5.5%, yeah, there's a little variation, but pretty much anywhere you go outside Dublin, rents are up year on year. In Dublin, it doesn't matter where you go, really, rents are down. So you can look at all the different postcodes. And yeah, again, there's a bit of difference. Some places, Dublin city centre has fallen a bit more, South City has fallen a bit more, and then if you go to West Dublin, it's fallen a bit less. But by and large, it's down in Dublin and up elsewhere. And as you mentioned, this is a story really about supply. Prices are just what happens. Rent prices going up or down is just what happens when supply meets demand. And if there isn't a lot of supply there, you'll get rents going up. And if there's an improvement in the situation, rents will come down. And that's what's happened over the last year. The supply situation in Dublin has actually improved. More rental properties have come on the market, and that's eased a crunch in rents or a spike in rents, whereas in the rest of the country, that hasn't been the same.
Ronan, you know, I'm always a fan of reading the reports that you author because you bring maybe a human element into the numbers, you know, and that really shares a deeper insight. So in terms of the supply, you know, is the increased supply in Dublin, we'll just take the Dublin market first before we look outside of Dublin. In the Dublin market, is the increased supply a real increase in terms of numbers, or is it just that there are fewer people taking up the stock that was there, so it's feeding into a larger supply?
Well, so I mean, this is a great question. I was only tweeting about this earlier about an increase in supply, and so some people said, "Well, what if it's a fall off in demand, not an increase in supply?" They'd give the same result. So I think the best way of looking at that is if you look at the number of ads that come on the market at any particular point in time. So on average, Dublin used to see about 2,100 rental ads per month in, say, if you go from, say, April 2019 to December 2019, so kind of pre-pandemic, Dublin was seeing about 2,100 rental homes coming on the market per month. That increased to 3,100 in the following period. So April 2020 to December 2020, the kind of the pandemic months. So there's a big increase in supply. All of those properties found a renter. So there was actually a big increase in demand as well. But the liquidity, the activity in the market improved, and that brought rents back down. And it's kind of helpful to think about, okay, how does Dublin look compared to the rest of the country there? Because in the rest of the country, COVID has had the opposite effect. So this is not like a foregone conclusion that COVID was always going to have this effect. In the rest of the country, the market has seized up even more, a bit like the sales market. In the sales market, there's anytime there's a level 5 or a lockdown, whatever you want to call it, the market seizes up. There aren't the same number of homes for sale, and that leads to a fall off in transactions. Whereas, as I say, the rental market outside Dublin is like that, but the rental market in Dublin has been different.
Okay, you know, I think it's really interesting when you talk about even the behavioural side of this, because at the start, like, you know, certainly 10 months ago, 11 months ago, we were thinking about what the likely impacts would be. And there were lots of predictions made. So many things have not gone as predicted. So in terms of not just the rental, but actually the marketplace in general, what has been your biggest surprise looking at the data now, now that we're into Q1 of 2021, looking back at 2020, you know, what are some of the surprises?
I think if you'd sat someone like me down a year ago and said, there's going to be an extraordinary pandemic, it's going to last at least a year, everyday activity is going to be restricted so heavily. Bars are going to be closed for a year. Restaurants are going to be closed for most of it. Lots of shops are going to be closed. Unemployment is going to go up 20% or 25% of the workforce. Somebody like me, after recovering, would have said, well, it's obvious that rents and sale prices are going to fall. And they're going to fall by 10, 15, 20%. That's what you'd expect to happen when you get such a big increase in unemployment. And if you look back at 2008, 9, 10, that was the story of the rental market, and it was at least half the story in the sales market. In the sales market, there was also the credit market realigning, but a big chunk of the falls was to do with unemployment rising and incomes falling. We haven't seen that. We've seen sale prices go up over the last 12 months, and not just in Ireland. It's not like Ireland is some sort of freakish property market. If you look at Britain, if you look at many places in Europe, and indeed in the US as well, sale prices for property have gone up during COVID, and some of that might be to do with the unprecedented level of protections for incomes, or the oddly, I suppose, what's the bifurcated, or like what they call the K-shaped recovery, in that you've got some sectors that are not affected at all. You have people working in financial services or public services, and their incomes are the same and their expenditure is down, so there's more money, even as there are other people who've lost their jobs. But some of it as well, I think, is to do with potentially due. We don't have the evidence to say this definitively yet, but I think some of it is down to a change in preferences, both as consumers and as wealth holders, that people are looking at property as an investment where, well, actually, when everything else fails, we're still going to be stuck in our home. So actually, we want to think long and hard about the kinds of homes we live in as renters or as buyers.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, because it really, this reminds me of maybe when you and I first met over a decade ago, and we were talking about the fallout of the crash, and the same thing, trying to predict behaviors and trying to look at maybe where we saw leaders emerge through the sector that were likely to lead us into recovery. And it feels like an element of this where sometimes the behavior doesn't correspond with what we might expect in the marketplace. And that's why I think it's interesting to see where the price increases and decreases are happening, in terms of rental and everything, because there's been so much talk about potential remote working and things like that. And, we haven't yet seen evidence to back that up, even though anecdotally we're seeing it everywhere. So is there anything kind of in the stats that tells us actually, the rents increasing outside of Ireland? Let's just take kind of some of the cities. So Limerick Waterford saw the largest increases. That was arguably coming off the lowest base.
And that's part of it. Is I think you almost have to break Ireland down into three types of market. There are the Dublin markets, there are the other cities, and then there's the rest of the country. Yeah. And in the rest of the country, you have this phenomenon of COVID actually worsening the shortage, that the rental markets have seized up. There were only 5 properties to rent in Offaly last week, anywhere in the county. It's extraordinary, and that's what's pushed rents up. And you could say some of that is people working more remotely. That's why there's so few. But we're not seeing the same volume of properties coming down in Offaly or in other places as we would have seen pre-COVID. So it doesn't really stack up. And as we've talked a good bit about Dublin, it's had the opposite effect. The other cities are somewhere in between. That the supply is up, like in Dublin, but rents are up, like in rural Ireland. So what we're seeing there, I think, is maybe the first signs that people are willing to think about what you'd call intercity swaps, that they did live in Dublin, but you know what, they're going to try Limerick or Galway or Waterford or Cork. And exactly as you said, because you get a city life, but it's significantly cheaper. The average rent in Dublin is about €2,000. The average rent in the other 4 cities, if you kind of lump them together, is about €1,300 or €1,400. So there's a good bit of savings there. And maybe we'll have to go back up to Dublin when everything's back to normal, but that's 6 months or 12 months away. So we can make that call closer to the time. And in the meantime, we'll save the money. It's not, though, I think, as you were saying in the question, we haven't seen yet this kind of politicians' ideal of, everyone's going to go off to Achill or to the Blasket Islands, whatever, and people, it doesn't really matter where you work. I was reading an interview with someone who moved to Achill, And it was really telling, that they were saying in it, I can't wait to get back to a town or to a city and to have cafes and so on. So even the people who are embracing the kind of the remote living, in the true sense of the word, people are not just workers, they're also, as economists say, consumers or livers, maybe is a better way of saying it. There's lots of other aspects of our lives that we love being around other people for. And I don't think that's going to change because of COVID.
Ronan, don't burst my bubble. I am one of the people who drank the Kool-Aid. I'm definitely intending to head west. So don't burst my bubble completely. But
no, you'll find the bargains. If you're willing to do that, then it'll be cheaper because it looks like at the moment there won't be floods of people doing it.
Yeah, but I suppose that brings itself to kind of a bigger question. We're looking at the rental prices, but at the moment, professional built rent hasn't really happened outside of Dublin and Cork. Is there an appetite, do you think, for investment that it would be needed in the other regional cities like Waterford, like Limerick, like Galway?
Well, and you can go even beyond that. You can think about Tullamore and Carrick and Shannon and Sligo and Kilkenny and Drogheda. And like all these places need significant increases in market rental, in social rental. There are whole categories of housing we don't really have in this country for younger and older. We've so many family homes, we don't know what to do with them. But it's all the other kinds of homes we're short. And you've touched on, I think, probably the key point for the housing system in Ireland in the 2020s, which is understanding how to get viability in places where currently they're so far from viability. Like if you take, as you're saying, build to rent, we've lots of plans for Dublin, about 30,000 units in Dublin on the way. That's what they say. And then maybe 2,000 or 3,000 in Cork and nothing elsewhere. But of course, that's not the pattern of demand, but that's the pattern of viability, that you can't make the numbers work. No matter how good a financial wizard you are, if you go and try and put in an apartment block of 100 apartments in Sligo town, you'll have to charge rents of 1,100 a month for a 2-bed, and that's twice what the market's going to bear. So we need to, like, if I were the housing minister, I wouldn't be looking at this report and saying, well, that's it, job done, rents in Dublin down 3%, rental issues are solved. It's okay, it proves that supply will help. It proves that the more supply you have, the more rents will come down. But the challenge of viability is still there.
I actually had a conversation with somebody who works in one of the housing organisations, the non-profit housing organisations last week, and she is looking at a move within Dublin, and she just expressed her frustration to me. She said, here I am working for one of these organisations. I don't qualify for social housing, and I can't even afford to rent an apartment on my own, so I'm going back in my 30s to rent a room in somebody's house. Yeah. What have we gotten so wrong?
So the way I think about this is, like, the central bank rules on the sales side, they have the clever side effect, not accidental at all, of linking sale prices for housing to the real economy. So no matter how crazy things get, they won't get as crazy as they were 2004, 5, 6, 7, where you could have house prices had kind of gone up to 7 or 8 times household income. But no part of government has done the same for the construction cost side of things. So even if you get free land and even if you have zero profit, it's still very expensive labour and materials to put in new housing, whether it's for sale or for rent. So of course, the supply side only ever cares about that prices to costs bit. Somebody's controlling prices, but costs have been allowed to drift up. And some of that is maybe down to the sector itself. Some of it is maybe down to regulation, that the kind of well-intentioned regulations, if you don't have countervailing measures, if you make it zero energy efficiency, if you make everything fully accessible and 9-foot ceilings and balconies, all that kind of stuff, all that may add bit by bit to cost. And what you're actually doing is not making the standard of housing better. You're just pricing out lower income households.
There's 2 things that you've touched on there that I'd love to delve into just a little bit, if you have a few extra minutes, and that is one, do you accept that actually, in terms of the cost of building, that I think the industry figure is that almost half isn't around the cost of building. Almost half of that is land administration and local authority levies. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to give an all in one because the side costs will vary so much. Like if you're buying in the centre of Dublin, down in Grand Canal Dock or something, versus if you're buying a site out in Drogheda, it's going to be very different, and the construction costs stay the same pretty much. It might vary a little bit, but basically the construction costs stay the same. So it's hard to give all in averages. But yeah, certainly what are typically called the soft costs and the land costs, they definitely add to the base of hard costs. But a lot of those soft costs, say the profit margin, government's VAT, they're percentages. So if you reduce the hard costs, you're reducing the soft costs as well. Okay. All the marketing fees will be a percentage of the costs that have been paid. So again, if you can get the core down, you actually have knock-on effects, which is not to say we shouldn't look at how we tax or look at how tax land or new development. It's not to say we should ignore issues like that. Of course, we should look at those things. But if we could do our damnedest and fix all those things, and we'd still be left with the issue of high construction costs.
Okay, but we know that the construction sector itself is is driving a huge initiative at the moment towards digital build, and that's all with the aim of increasing output, driving efficiencies, so as not to increase costs. We're seeing this move towards offsite construction and other methods of modern construction, and I understand this isn't your area, so I definitely don't want to throw this one at you, but I think it's really important for us to understand, because one of the sources of frustration when we came out of the crash is that I felt just from a kind of an almost a non-expert view of it, was that the pace of the recovery after the crash seemed to surprise everybody. So there wasn't time taken, or the opportunity wasn't used to make improvements then that ought to have been made. So now, we have this unprecedented pandemic and impacts. And I'm just wondering, are we missing another opportunity to actually drive real change that could actually have an impact on, persistent issues like affordability? Yeah,
I mean, you're singing or preaching to the converted on that. I wrote a piece at the end of 2009, so this is kind of in the height of negative equity mortgage arrears and so on. And I was saying like this, we're entering a rental shortage in Dublin, and part of the problem is that nuance gets lost in politics. So it's possible for some parts of Ireland, for example, the Northwest, to be suffering from a glut of housing that's unused, and other parts of Ireland, in particular, say the Dublin rental market, to be suffering shortages. They're not perfect substitutes for each other. So both those things are possible at the same time. But it really took, I'd say, until 2014 or 2015 for the idea of shortages to be back on the agenda. And that's frustrating, because you can be banging a drum for, in that case, 5 years before... and I'm not the only one, there were others saying it as well, before you realise that the current drum I'm banging is around housing for the diverse ways in which we live at the moment. And this is something that's been kind of ignored. In the 2010s, it was like, let's just get the number of homes built up. And as far as politicians are concerned, when you build a 3-bed semi-D, that's the homes you want to build. Families are voters, and that's, if you can get 20,000 of those, you're done. But if you look at where our population is changing, we're adding so many 70, 80, 90 somethings to our population. We're adding 20 and 30 somethings, pre-family households to our population. And that is something that's going to happen over the next 2-3 decades. And we really need to get away from building kind of 90% of our homes being either one-offs or estate housing, to building everything from assisted living and independent living complexes for older households, downsizer apartments, urban core high-rise apartments, and then even the dreaded kind of student accommodation and co-living sector. Like if you've got 1 million single persons aged between 20 and 39, it's not inconceivable that the country would need 5,000 or 6,000 co-living units. And as sacrilege and heresy as it is to say in Ireland today, that's where we're going in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Are you surprised? I'm so delighted that you went on to the different classifications of living, because that was exactly the final topic that I wanted to discuss with you, because it feels like a decade ago. I'm not going to say you were single-handedly doing it, but you were definitely one of the voices championing this need for Irish people in Ireland to embrace apartment living beyond, as a, beyond as your first professional, where you're living professionally, but that actually, and I would argue that apartment design has not improved enough over that decade to make it attractive for a lot of families. So and I know there's huge work being done in all the city centres actually to target this. But in terms of the categories that you touched on, how have we moved on a decade, and yet it feels like we have fewer housing types and fewer housing options, because the bottom rung of the ladder has been taken away completely. And look, the market abhors a void. So we know you take away the bottom rung of the ladder and we get, shared living and co-living. And by banning that, have we just almost taken away two rungs of the ladder? And I say this with an adult daughter at home.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, this goes through to things like people objecting to planning permissions. Of course, they have a right to object to planning permissions, but I think given the country is short so many homes, that anyone who's a serious objector should say, look, I don't think this is the right development here, so this is my counter proposal, right? Like, we're talking about a country that needs, and everyone has their own figures. My own calculations are, given where our population is likely to be in terms of size, location, and age by mid-century, we need something like 45 to 50,000 new homes a year of all types. And in principally non-family households. The majority of households already are one or two persons, and that's only going to increase as the years go on. How have we ended up where we are with things looking actually more kind of monotonous maybe than 10 or 15 years ago? I think part of it was that the base we had 15 years ago for building non-family homes was a fragile base. It was tax breaks. That was the only reason. And they were a great idea when they were in kind of urban renewal schemes. And then they kind of went into, let's get votes in constituency schemes. And that was just a terrible idea. I mean, we saw that in the fallout of the bubble. So for me, the number one priority, and it's kind of like going back to something we talked about earlier, but in a way that just confirms, hopefully, that it is all actually coming back to the same core questions. If I were Minister for Housing, the single most important thing for me to understand is why it is so expensive to build housing for one or two person households in Ireland compared to other countries. Is it the productivity in the sector? Is it the methods they use? Is it wage rates? Is it taxation? Is it how we sell and trade land? We need those answers, because we can't solve the problem until we've tackled those. As it is, the kind of business as usual cases will just keep going further and further away from town centres and city centres, building on greenfield sites, building more 3 and 4 bed semi-Ds, and effectively trapping people in those until they die. And that's not the way other countries do housing. And I don't think it's the way we should do housing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I mean, one of the topics that I'm so sorry that we have to wrap up now, because one of the topics that we didn't get onto, but you touched on, was about housing for, I think you mentioned housing for the elderly, whereas I would see it more as maybe not even step down accommodation, but certainly accommodation that for downsizers, but within their own communities.
Exactly.
Look, I suppose, in 60 seconds, is there a way to unlock spaces within community, underused spaces?
Okay. As briefly as I can, I think you've touched on a really key issue, which is we need some integration between health and housing from a policy-making point of view, so that we get, say, in particular, assisted living, but even independent living on the table, and that it's a zoning category, and that there are targets set per decade or per 3 or 4 year period, whatever it might be, because that's going to be key. But even aside from the sort of integrated healthcare stuff, as you say, downsizers will happily downsize when it's in their area. You talked about, will we live in apartments? And the funny thing is, where they've been built, apartment blocks in, say, Terranure or Blackrock or Castleknock, they're disproportionately lived in by over 55s. So we have absolutely no problem living in them. We just don't have enough of them.
Okay, no, it's an interesting one. Ronan, I would love to chat to you for so many more hours about this, but we'll have to leave that for another day. That was Ronan Lyons, assistant professor at Trinity College Dublin and author of the Daft Rental report. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
Hello and welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or hello@iPropertyRadio.com. I'm now joined by Louisa Dickens, co-founder of LMRE. Louisa, thank you so much for joining us today from snowy London.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And yeah, London is looking pretty beautiful, but it is absolutely freezing.
Yeah, well, it's freezing here, but we haven't got the snow yet. So first of all, just for people who aren't familiar, LMRE is a well-known brand in the UK, but maybe not so familiar in Ireland, even though you do work internationally. So you might just give our audience an overview of LMRE.
Yeah, of course. So LMRE, we are a specialist property technology recruitment firm. So we first started in the UK, then expanded across Europe, and then from relationships with us expanding US companies in the UK and Europe, we then were like, what are we doing just over here when the Proptech scene in the US is about probably 5 years in advance of us? So then, launched a year and a half across North America. And now as of 2 months ago, we launched in APAC. And then there's 3 core parts of our business. So one is helping early to later stage property technology startups to grow. So that can be across all roles from deep tech, like product engineers, to the salespeople, the customer success, the strategy. Second part of our business is, and I think one of the most exciting parts, especially since the year of COVID, which has really pushed forward digitalization of the traditional real estate and consultancy world, is we work like the Jones Lang LaSalle's, the Oxford Properties, when they need to digitalize, and that could be globally. So that could be a super junior data scientist to who on earth is putting together their digitalization strategy. And then the third part of our business is working with the VCs. So that could be the likes of Metaprop, AO, Fifth Wall. So we could help them out hiring, a principal. So the person who's sort of looking, how they're going to raise their funds, to an analyst who's looking at, what Proptechs they're going to invest in. So those are the 3 core areas, and it sort of changes every single day as more more investment and development goes into this space. So it's been a hell of a journey, but really enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today because I can see not just the international reach, but also you're actually spread right across the entire ecosystem. So you've got the startups working directly with them. You have the VCs who are funding and in a way kind of almost shining a light on the future of the industry. But also you're working with the traditional industry to bring them along. So you've a really good overview. So, I mean, really to start with, where do you think we are? And this might be too broad a question, so let's just take it from the UK. Where do you think we are in terms of tech adoption across the built environment?
That is a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer. Where are we? We've definitely seen an increase in adoption, like I mentioned, since the pandemic. I think it's also in certain areas. I think everyone's talking about the future of the workplace, so there's been massive growth in sort of tenant engagement. I also think especially since the change in president in the US, there's going to be a massive shift to investment into climate tech as well. We've already seen in Europe, like the Nordics, and I think the UK, adoption in climate tech or, ESG, everyone loves talking about it. Do we all quite know what that is yet? I don't know. It's like a buzzword. Those definitely are 2 growth areas I've seen in adoption and also investment. And it's high on everyone's agendas. I think if you sort of follow where investment is going, that's where you'll see further adoption. So I think in 2019, there was $19 billion that went into PropTech, and there was further $32 billion that went in 2020. And we're only I presume, unless something crazy happens, we're just going to see that investment go up. And that's obviously, what's driving the VC community and the major funds to invest is the promise of ever increasing returns in a market that's sort of ripe for reform and innovation. So like I mentioned, climate tech, sustainability, and construction tech as well. But I would say it's across like all verticals, and every single day I'm introduced to a new vertical with a sexy new name, which has tech at the end of it. I think it's on everyone's sort of agendas. But yeah, the more investment goes in, the more products we're going to see, which is super exciting.
Yeah, do you know, I'm actually trying not to engage with all of the new buzzwords that have tech at the end of it, because I think, you know, in a way that just highlights how immature this sector is. You know, the fact that, you know, it would be almost like, you know, a writer calling themselves, you know, in tech because they're writing on a computer 20 years ago, you know, and it feels like that. You know, we're talking about technologies that would be just ubiquitous to the operations of the job. You know, so so actually I think the hallmark for success for Proptech and all of these other sectoral techs will be when we stop using those words. That's just how business operates. But I think it's really interesting that you're seeing across these ESG metrics and all around the sustainability. I think it's really interesting that you're seeing both an increase in adoption and an increased focus from the VCs, because those two strands hardly ever work side by side. Now, maybe the pandemic is shining a light and making it easier for the industry to know where they need to be and for the VCs to know where the funds need to go. But, you know, generally speaking, you know, if we look back historically, not just Proptech, but all tech investment, generally the VCs could be almost a decade ahead of where the industry adoption is. So if we're starting to see those streams run side by side, I think that's really exciting. And, you know, maybe we did a little bit in fintech as well. So maybe that's what is in store for Proptech over the next number of years. But I think that's really exciting, you know, because it will take away this challenge of digital transformation across the industry, because they will understand that this is how we do business, you know. It has become such a cliche to say that the pandemic has accelerated the rate of tech adoption across the built environment, but it absolutely has, you know, particularly if you're talking about traditional estate agency, right through to traditional construction sites. It absolutely has accelerated. There's no way meetings would have been done via Zoom. You know, people were flying to different countries for site visits and site walkthroughs. That's never, I think, going to be a necessary feature again. I hope we don't go backwards.
Well, then also with that, like, it goes back down to the sustainability, you know, preserving like the world we sort of live in, that, you know, technology is really going to help with that. I also think going back to, you know, these funds and the VCs, you know, VCs should be and are, you know, ahead of, you know, the traditional funds and agencies, but they're really working like hand in hand to obviously, like Fifth Wall, you know, they've raised a climate tech fund, which obviously focus completely on that sort of space. And they're the people that we're sort of working with to raise it, that will, a lot of them from the sort of traditional sort of real estate area. So yeah, no, it's really exciting. And I think the beauty of this space is that it's all about collaboration. It's all about everyone sort of championing each space, but working together. So if we see more of that, I mean, it should be happy days for the I guess progressiveness and innovation in this space.
Yeah, you know, there are a couple of services that feed into a growing or a sector that really you can read a lot into, and I think recruitment is one of those. So, in terms of like, can you share with us maybe, you know, who's hiring at the moment? What types of startups are they? More established? Have they funding? You know, what's the profile? And feel free to name drop.
Yeah, I can't be careful about name dropping. I don't want to give any biases to some of my clients, and our clients completely sort of vary to, God, you've got the guys at BTS and Y Squad. I mean, their success stories, their product isn't super technical, but they serve a clear value proposition within leasing and connectivity, which is what we all sort of need. Who is hiring? That's a really good question. So to give you, we were just looking at who, I guess for our business, how it's grown. Our roles are up by nearly 200% this month to last year, which is crazy. So we got a team. So our business started 2 years ago. Our team's now 20 people. We've got 5 more people starting next month. We've got a further 5 to make sure that we're delivering. What roles are being hired for? So if we focus on the startups, so that could be some from Early stage one, there's a business called Instagram that does deposit-free renting on sort of desks, which obviously lots of people want now because, there's a lot, no one wants to do the upfront cost, especially in this sort of market, no one knows when they're going back. So they could hire for someone who's launching a product, head of business development to, at the end of the day, in this environment, everyone needs to keep growing their product. So they all constantly need good product people, good data scientists, good engineers. And then you have your later stage ones like BTS and Y-Squad who are launching across the world. So they're going to need country managers. But with that, they need all the other tech support, salespeople, customer success. And then you have obviously the big, larger funds like Oxford Properties, which I think really have been pushing forward and in making sure they are one step ahead of other businesses and digitalizing. So they could hire anyone from, someone in like IoT, data. It's at the end of the day, it's all things come down to data. That's where the skill shortages are, and that's where we will consistently see hires. And then you have the VCs who, they're constantly trying to find good people who can sort of, with experience in successful exits and sort of, I guess, raising the funds. But honestly, I couldn't pinpoint where we're seeing most hires. What I could pinpoint is where we're seeing most skill shortages, and that is in the data scientist space. Really good SaaS sales professionals, and where else would I say? Good product managers. Those are the three areas of skill shortages. And I think a lot of it comes down to one, this Proptech industry. Within real estate software, you had the first generation of the MRI and Yardies. You have that, but then otherwise, in the past sort of 3 years, there's not so many people, and if we're focusing in the UK, have been doing it. In the US, fine, you can find someone who's been doing it for a lot longer, but that's where the skill shortage is because it's just such an early stage in this business. So for a lot of these roles, when it comes down to data or SaaS sales, we're bringing them in from other industries which are similar. So like this, fintech, that can you move over? You've got to look at what sort of products are out there, what sort of similar sort of sales cycles. And then data scientists, what are the big data companies? Where can we headhunt them out? And a lot of talent, at the end of the day, talent will follow investment. That's why more people want to go into sustainability space, hopefully for ethical and moral reasons, but also because they'll follow investment. So I think we're seeing a lot of people realizing the mass expansion investment of this sector and how big it can be. So it's actually a lot easier to headhunt people from the sector. Hey, have you seen what's happening? $32 billion investment. What we saw in fintech is now going to happen to Proptech. And so that sort of piece is moving quite well for us. But yeah, it's across the board. We're seeing mass hires, and we're going to continue to see it as well.
I think it's interesting when you talk about people coming from other sectors, because traditionally, if we were looking at this 10 or 15 years ago, all middle to senior management across property management, construction, and property development generally, unless they came from an accounting background, they tended to be people who were born and raised in property, or certainly from early career right up through in property. So you didn't have many people, certainly, unless it was maybe on a marketing role or something, you didn't see people jump industries in their 40s,
Yeah.
And so if you'd been in retail, suddenly jumping into construction, it just didn't happen. Whereas I think technology has been a great enabler, that actually it is making that really necessary. And I see the drive, particularly on the construction tech side, everything related to offsite construction methodology. Suddenly you're bringing in anybody who has a strong manufacturing and process driven industry. So those transferable skill sets are becoming really interesting. And
Yeah.
Are you seeing a trend, because, obviously we're all in lockdown, we're all operating remotely. Is that reflected in the roles that you're recruiting for now at the moment? How location specific are they, both for a region and for a country?
Yeah. And this, really good question. And all businesses are open to sort of remote working now. All our clients realizing, we don't have to pay a London salary, or in the US. Why they're not they're saying to us, fine, as long as they're based on the east or west coast, that's fine with us and they can work in our time zones. But I ideally don't want to pay a San Francisco salary or New York salary, which is on average about 50% more than you have in the other sort of states, you know, and we're seeing so many people relocate to like Denver, Atlanta, you know, Austin. One, because there's like they get more like value for their buck at the end of the day. It's better lifestyle for them. And they can now have access to all the job opportunities. So, yeah, I think it's the same thing for universities as well. Lots of businesses used to target universities. And now all these students realizing they don't have to go to that university to be headhunted. You know, they don't have to just go to MIT or something like that. So the remote workforce, I think, will stay on. You know, everyone talks about, you know, are we ever going back to the office? We definitely will. That's where innovation all happens. That's where also, if you want to hire this young talent, they want to be around people. They don't want to just be, you know, working on their own. Like, I miss my team so much. I'm right now in like my room in sort of southwest London, and I spend my time on Zooms to my team, and I think it completely sucks. And if I ever want to maintain my team at LMRE, I know I'm going to have to get them back in the office as soon as it's safe to. I think going on to what you were sort of saying about attracting talent from other industries should probably bring us on quite well into a big issue which we've had in real estate, and now we're slowly addressing, and that's obviously the diversity issue, you know, of the, whether it's sort of gender, race, you know, sexual orientation, but also like diversity will bring innovation and fresh sort of ideas and perspectives, which is what I think this real estate technology industry really, really needs. I don't know if you sort of agree with that as well.
Oh, I definitely agree. Through Proptech Ireland, we have had contacts through about 140 to 150 startups. 4 of those, actually 3 of those have been female-led, and 1 has had a senior female person in it. So our hit rate diversity covers a whole manner of things, but in Ireland, what I'm seeing is gender diversity for Proptech is so far below even the shockingly low gender diversity in generic tech. So this is definitely an issue, right down to actually on this podcast. You know, we actually are ascribed to a Women on Air ethos, where we are constantly looking to showcase female voice in the industry, particularly in construction. And it can be difficult because it is such construction obviously is still very male dominated, but I'm surprised at how male dominated Proptech is. I just wasn't expecting that, because across property management we're seeing a really good spread. So I'm really surprised by that, actually. So are you telling me you're seeing, you know, in terms of where are you seeing the lack of diversity overall? And I'm sure this will vary country to country, but you know, where are the big problem areas?
Well, I think startups are known for just being chaotic. One thing I will really what I do in my about startups, a big thing which they talk about is sort of getting their sort of culture right, and like making sure they have diverse teams, and they're doing a really good job. And I think that comes down to fundamentally at the beginning of their growth cycle, in, you know, they make sure they have like where it's a head of diversity or head of culture, and that's brought into like step 1 or 2 of the interview process, which really sort of promotes, you know, inclusiveness. They also make sure they tap into different sort of, whether it's like demographics and programs, so they're not just headhunting. There's like so many like biases which big funds and institutions go to. If you just look on their job specs, they have like, right, I want to see someone coming from X university, but like, I don't think the best talent will come to, this comes down to educational experience. Like, if you're going to an innovative business or whatever it may be, it comes down from like job experience as well, and life experience. And like, I'm not saying it comes down just purely life, like it means, say, a data scientist working, you know, the work that some of these young people do outside of, you know, going to university. It's amazing, all these online programming courses you can do. It doesn't just come down to universities. One thing which I'm seeing a lot of the larger businesses do, global agencies, they're they're trying to ensure that their senior change management, has a women ambassador or something like that. Because look, again, your young talent, they don't want to go work for a business just full of white men. I've had so many people turn these roles down because they're like, that's not the sort of environment which I want to go into. And it's definitely something which we're going to see a further growth in Cushman and Wakefield. And I guess Great Portland Estates, they have, cultural diversity and innovation ambassadors, across all the teams. And that's really important. It could be, we go back to the idea of inclusiveness, collaboration, and that's going to come down from having people in every single team, promoting these things, coming up with new initiatives. And that's a tiny thing. That doesn't cost the business money, but it does it sets a sentiment for it to ensure it's happening across all teams. So I think super important, but it's really hard. And for us to provide diverse talent, it's so impossible. What you said, technology, male, real estate, changing, but fairly white and male. So we're now working with various associations globally. So there's a great business called Collective that has
apologies, Louisa, your line just broke up there. Unfortunately, one of the downsides of recording remotely. So can you just repeat the name of that organization, please?
Oh, perfect. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, the Proptech Collective. We have something super exciting coming out this week, which I will share with you when this comes out. But very exciting report, which hasn't been done yet in the world. But there's something like 250 startups part of it, all the funds, REITs, institutions in Canada are part of it. And then they do constant webinars, forums, panels, but it's a consistently active group. Anyone's welcome to join. And when we say diverse, it's not just a women's group, okay? Because there's loads of these just women's organizations. It's men, white people, black, everyone's part of it. And that's really helped with collaboration and innovation. There's there's so many associations people can sort of tap into. And that's what we've really been focusing on as a business now, to try and ensure that when we're doing a shortlist, it is diverse, but it is pretty difficult. And some of our clients will pay us literally about 10% more to ensure we find them, a female head or something like that.
Do you think the diversity conversation is on the right track? Because look, I think it's really important that we talk about gender, ethnicities, whether it's hiring people with disabilities. Quite frankly, if I wasn't self-employed for the last decade and a half, I would have been a terrific token hire for any business. I know this. But look, what I'm seeing in Proptech, particularly, there's such a focus on data as well. Are we seeing a lack of diversity of mindset, of patterns of thought, how people think, how people approach things? Because, we're seeing a lot of engineering mindsets coming through. And, one thing we know about innovation is that you need diverse thinking. Is there a focus on that within traditional organizations?
So I did. Yes, there is. I think they're all trying to work out how can they you can't tell someone to think creatively, but what you can do, you can set an environment where you give them access to what it could be. You could bring startups in to talk to the younger people, your business, be like, hey, have you ever thought about this or this sort of product? So I did a presentation to REMTech, which is Real Estate Investment Management Tech Associations. You have AXA, Viva, PGIM, they're all part of it. And they all want to know how can they make people inside that organization think more creatively. And I was like, okay, before I did this presentation, we did a survey where we were asking 50 surveyors, analysts who we've all placed into a startup company. How do they make the move? What can the businesses do? And they said, one, having senior change management, really sort of basically doing talks on the importance of innovation, how to basically reimagine the future of real estate. Another one was sort of upskilling. So that could be sort of giving them access to different courses online, or just talking about the differences. Anthony Slumbers does amazing, the Real Innovation Academy. There's so many like really short machine learning courses, which will give someone a little flavor of what sort of roles you can go into. So a lot of it comes down to like early stage education, and then giving people all the access to data and learning facilities. But at the end of the day, you can't tell them to think, to be inquisitive of it. You would hope if you give them all the tools, they would go use them, and then hopefully that should start progressing them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a big part of it is, you mentioned there that some companies come to you and say, we want to hire from X university or maybe from X institution. And to me, that's how you get more of the same. But look, this is something that I could talk to you all day about. But unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. But before I let you go, Louisa, because you have this lovely spread, across the entire ecosystem, what are the lessons that need to be learned, from the real estate world for traditional players who actually want to make the move towards Proptech?
Traditional, okay. I think, for people looking to enter the space?
Yeah, or even for traditional firms that haven't started to dip their toe in the water yet, in terms of digital transformation, what do they need to know? What do they need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing they need to do is make sure their CEO or whoever it is fully on board with digitalization, looking at timeframes of it, and then promoting it across their whole business. I think a lot of these players are, they're watching a few other businesses do it first before they start investing in technology or adopting it. And those are the guys who are going to actually end up losing profit, market share. So it's. I'm not saying it's a race, but people definitely need to be taking it seriously because it's happening right now. What can they do? I think they need to start talking to these VCs. They need to start talking to these saying influencers, but the thought leaders, and then start trialing to go meet these startups. There's some amazing success stories. Like I mentioned sort of ETS, I mentioned sort of Y Scores. It's amazing. Like talk to the big software businesses if you're worried about the startups. Everyone's using Voyanta, MRI, Yardi, but go talk to them, go pilot them, bring them in, and just. Everyone's going to have reservations. There's no perfect product out there, but until they know what problem you have in your business, they can't help you, can't tell you about a product that could help deliver on that. So go speak to people, go learn.
Louisa, you forgot the most important advice, and that is to listen to your own podcast, the Propcast, which we do feature on iPropertyRadio.com. And it's excellent. Are you starting into your what season are you?
We've got season 4 coming out nearly now, and then we have already our lineup for season 5. So anyone listening today, check out the Propcast, which I'm host of, and have basically it's about bridging the gap between the real estate professionals, the technologists, and the VCs globally. And if you want to hear about certain trends, topics, or from certain businesses, just shoot us an email at LMRE. Podcast.co.uk, and we'll come back to you. But Pammy, looking for ideas and check it out.
Super. And I can definitely recommend that. It's one of my favorites, and it's one that I'm subscribed to. Even before it went on to the iProperty Radio channel, I was subscribed to that. So I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us here today. That was Louisa Dickens, co-founder of LMRE. That's it from us this week. Thank you for listening into Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio, or indeed email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Also, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound and show producer Katie Tallon of Hear Me Roar Media. We're back at the same time next week. For myself, Carol Tallon, and all the team here, stay safe.